Hello, friends. We are here today in Galatians chapter 4. So Galatians chapter 4 is talking a lot about slavery and freedom. There's a question that was brought up in the last chapter. And it was this idea, like, if you're saved through grace, if God has chosen to save you through grace today, then why were his people living under the law for so long? Like, was there something wrong with the law? And he's answering that question. He's saying, when you're the heir of a kingdom or of a great estate or something to that effect, when you're a child, you are essentially just like a slave. There's that idea of slavery and freedom. He said there's no difference because you don't have certain rights. You don't have the ability to do what you want. The servants in your house can tell you what to do. And when you're a child, you really have no say. Until you're in Judaism, until you're about 12 years old, you really don't have any rights at all. He's saying when they were under the old covenant, it was almost like they were children. And then they grew up. Now that Jesus has come, they're heirs, or they can be heirs. Now, the point that he's making is that we are heirs also through adoption. The same way that they were heirs through being God's chosen people, through faith, both of us are saved. I want you to be not under the law like I was. Don't get yourselves under the law now. Because the issue at the time was that they were looking at Christianity and people were telling them, you need to be under the law. And he's saying, no, don't go back. I was freed from the law, and now you guys are getting under it, even though you were never under it to begin with. Now there's an interesting element to this. He says you guys were slaves also to something, and it wasn't the law, but it was essentially the same. It was something that he calls the elementary principles of the world. He mentions it twice, the elementary principles of the world. If you're reading a different translation, every translation translated differently because it's one word in the Greek and it's kind of hard to translate. But if you've ever read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, he talks all about this principle in the world, that it's like, you get what you deserve, that there's some form of justice in the world that needs to prevail. That we can all identify that there's right and wrong in the world. And if you do wrong, then you don't deserve good things in life. And if you do right, you do deserve good things in life. And he's saying, you guys were a slave to this principle, just as I was a slave to the law. Now, what he is saying here is that we're both freed from that, because we can both be forgiven for the horrible things that we've done. So that's something I thought was interesting, that elementary principles of the world. It's exactly what I tend to fall into time and time again. And I think we all do. I think it's purposeful. I think that God put these ideas and these things in our heart so that we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that we don't deserve to be forgiven. But the wonderful thing about it is that we are forgiven. We are saved through grace. We are saved by grace through faith. So he I feel like he's been really harsh in this letter so far. But at some point in this chapter, he says, look, I know that I wasn't planning on coming there to Galatia, but I did because of an illness, and you, Galatians, were just so wonderful. And he says, I even know that, it was some sort of like eye troubles that he was having. And he says, I know that you would have gouged out your own eyes if it would have done any good, you would have given me your own eyes. And he's saying, essentially he's trying to say here that the people of Galatia are good people. They're very gracious people, and they were wonderful to him. And he's essentially saying that he really loves the Galatians, but he doesn't want to see them going into slavery. And then he brings it back to Abraham. And if you don't know this part of Abraham's story, Abraham was given the promise of this heir. We talked about this yesterday, and they made this covenant, and God said, I will not break this covenant. And he says, it's through your own son you will have it. And at some point he didn't. He kind of veered away from his trust in God, or at least he was trying to make his own way, because his wife said, why don't you sleep with my servant, my slave, essentially. He says, why don't you sleep with my slave, and then you will have this heir. He does, and they have Ishmael. And then later on, Sarah, at 90 years old, gets pregnant. What they did was they ended up pushing away the slave girl. They gave her everything she needed, but they just said, this is our heir, and so we're gonna give you everything you need. And Ishmael was well taken care of for the rest of his life, and he was a very successful person, but he was not the child of the promise. And he's saying we can look at this allegorically. He's saying we know that through Isaac this promise was coming, that he symbolizes freedom. Now I also want to point out that the children of Hagar, he's not talking about Islam. Of course, Islam doesn't come up for another 500 years, but what he is saying here is that the children of Hagar, they're a symbol of faithlessness, and they're also a symbol of being in slavery. And so he's saying, no, you need to be a child of this heir, of the one that comes through true faith. You need to be not a child of slavery, but a child of freedom that comes through faith. And so, the gracious child. And so he's saying that's the heir that you want to become, not the one that's under the law. So that is Galatians chapter 4. Have a great day.